Morgott the Fell, King Morgott, last of all kings. Morgott, the Omen King. Despite what he calls himself, or how he chooses to present himself to us, Morgott has been a loyal servant to the Golden Order. He has dedicated his life to an order, to a people whom, despite his best efforts, rejected him because of his accursed blood, or his Omen curse. Morgott and his twin brother Moog, who would later be known as the Lord of Blood, were casted down by the royal family. Both of the Omen twins were children of Queen Marika the Eternal and Lord Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. The two grew up with the rest of the Omens who were rejected by the Golden Order Society, but the paths of the twins diverged at some point, where one chose to reject the Order and the other chose to embrace it. In this video, I want to talk about the Omen King himself, Morgott. I'm going to break down why the Erdtree Society rejected him and how, despite this, he still became a Lord of Leyndell. Before we begin with the analysis, I want to take a moment to briefly talk about Morgott's history. As I've alluded to before, I feel that doing this would give a better idea on both the world in which Morgott grew up in and also the mind of Morgott. So, what is an omen? Well, outside the world of Elden Ring, an omen is usually a sign of bad things to come. Now, that isn't to say that there can't be good omens, but most people use the word as a way to express a sign of disaster. In the beginning of Elden Ring's timeline, the first stage of life is known as the Crucible. According to the item description of the Great Spear Celeria's tree, quote, the primordial form of the Erdtree is close in nature to life itself, and this spear, modeled on its crucible, is imbued with an ancient holy essence, end quote. Primordial, meaning from the beginning of time or at an early stage. So what this means is that the Crucible and its inhabitants came long before the Erdtree and the Golden Order. This includes the Omens. From Software leans into the idea of bad things to come when referring to the horned individuals as omens, but they weren't always viewed as abominations. Revealed in the DLC of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, it is revealed that the Omens were actually once a civilization known as the Hornsent. Those born with horns were seen as divinity, as the Crucible Feathered Talisman reads, quote, a vestige of the crucible of primordial life. Born partially of devolution, it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but it is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization advanced, end quote. The way I think of it is that the Crucible was the beginning stages of life. Then came civilization, and in this context we're looking towards the hornsent. Now, as I've pointed out in my previous Mesmer video, the hornsent were a violent people, specifically to the shamans. If you want more information on the hornsent, I would suggest you watch my video on Mesmer the Impaler. But the quick TLDR is that the hornsent would stuff the shamans into jars. We know this from the Bonnie butchering knife and the tooth whip. The butchering knife reads, an outsized butcher's cleaver used to dismember bodies in the making of the great jars stored in the jails. And the tooth whip reads, whip bestrewn with rotting misshapen teeth. Filthy and seething with diseases, the teeth are embedded with the whip and dose the victim with deadly poison upon each strike. As the wounds ripen, they grow inflamed and ooze pus. The flesh of the shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others. Now, I believe the reason that they did this was because the hornsent saw the shamans as lesser people. Either they wanted to make them better or make the shamans suffer. The Whipping Hut ghost says to one of the shamans, quote, for pity's sake, your place is in the jar. Thy sainthood itself awaits you within. For shamans like you, this is your lot. Life were you accorded for this alone. End quote. So by the end of all this, regardless on the motivations, the shamans were brutally tortured by the hornsent. And this is, well, everything to the Golden Order. It is the motivator for why Marika is seeking vengeance on the hornsent. It's basically what leads her to godhood. Marika's people were the shaman. The minor Erdtree spell found in the shaman village tells us that she was a shaman, as it reads, quote, Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal, end quote. It was because of this Marika sent her son Mesmer to destroy the hornsent and burn them to the ground. They destroyed her home and her people, so she sought vengeance to do the same to them. But it wasn't until she rose to godhood that her sins on the hornsent would come back to haunt her in the twins of Mohg and Morgott. They were of hornsent lineage, but we are not in the lands of shadows where the hornsent resided. We are in the lands between. Okay, maybe they weren't hornsent lineage, but you get my meaning. They were omens, omens of what would follow in the lands between. But we'll get to that in a moment. In this new golden order, society would worship the greater will, an outer god, and not the outer god of the hornsent. Marika made it a point to view horned individuals as evil, or as omen. As I stated, Morgott and Mohg were casted down from the royal family. Because they were part of Marika's lineage, their horns were not cut. Bear in mind that just because their horns were not cut does not mean that other omens were granted the same right. The horns were one of the physical features of an omen, and given that they grew on top of one's head, it was distinguishable to determine who was born with the cursed blood. It should also be worth noting that despite his royal lineage, Morgott chose to have his horns cut, one of the many signs of his loyalty to the Greater Will and the Golden Order. His twin brother, however, chose to let his grow, even to the point where one protrudes his left eye. All omen, royal or otherwise, were casted down to the subterranean shunning grounds, which was below Lane Dell. This was essentially the sewer of the royal capital, where the rats and other bottom feeders would live. They were chased and brought down by omen killers who, quote, bear masks with the smirking face of an elder, twisted in wicked delight. This visage is carved in the image of evil spirits that haunted the omen in their nightmares. End quote. Suffice to say, omens still lived torturous and difficult lives. But what I find interesting is that while she tried to distance herself from them, Marika let the torture of the omens go on unchecked. Either that or she chose to look the other way, lest she be reminded of the atrocities she committed to rise to power. A third possibility could be that she insisted on the continuous torture of the Hornsent and their descendants as a continuation of her vengeance. But with all this being brought to light, I want to now move on to the Omen King himself and sort of break down his character while also taking his history into account. When we first arrive at the Erdtree Sanctuary, Morgott casts a spell to conjure the first Elden Lord, but only the first phase. This is one of the few examples we see where the relationship of Godfrey and Morgott is very deep. We can assume that Morgott learned some of his fighting prowess through his father, Godfrey. As it is known, Godfrey had fought many battles in the name of Marika. This would also explain how Morgott was able to seemingly beat Radahn. General Radahn, admired Godfrey and even displayed this admiration on his armor. However, unlike Morgott, Radahn was not trained by the first Elden Lord himself. I say this because when I think about it, one of the hallmarks of Godfrey's character is how strong of a warrior he is. I mean, half his personality is literally
Horaloo! Warrior!
So it's easy to see that one of the things the father and son duo would probably bond over would be fighting or battle. This also leads to how I think Morgott was able to hold back the forces from attacking Lane Dell when the Shattering War occurred. Again, because Godfrey was his father. There's a reason why Godfrey was able to win as many battles as he did. Granted, he had the power of a god and anime on his side, but the point still stands. The few holy attacks that Morgott uses during his fights are probably something he taught himself or slowly picked up on. Now, in terms of the level scaling that the game provides us, Morgott had a high faith stat. Now, this does make sense because if you have a high faith stat, you're able to perform more incantations based on faith. Furthermore, some of the endgame spells require high faith. The same can be said for a number of other characters in the game. Another example I can think of is Renala. Her quote-unquote stats is all intelligence, which is how she's able to perform powerfully high sorceries. But if you ask me, I think she also put a lot into mine given how much she freaking spams spells in her second phase. My point is that Morgott was so devoted to the Golden Order and the Greater Will that it's possible he was able to create the Golden Order holy weapons he uses in his fights. I think he created these spells because he is the only one in-game that is able to wield these spells and use them. Bear in mind, though, that this is all speculation. Now, at some point, and I believe it was around the time of the Shattering, Morgott escaped the Shunning Grounds and took control of the Elden Throne. And this makes sense because the Elden Ring was shattered, Marika and Radagon were nowhere to be found. The Omen twins took this opportunity to escape the Shunning Grounds, and I think this is where their paths diverged. Mohg had the Formless Mother to guide him, and at this point probably despised the Golden Order for casting him down and torturing him. Morgott, for some reason or another, sought to protect his oppressors. Looking back to the idea of Godfrey training Morgott, it's possible that Morgott was able to be in the capital, if only in secret, whether because he snuck out or Godfrey allowed it. Hi, this is me in a little bit of an editing role. I no longer really think this. I think that Morgott was basically, when he was in the capital for the brief time that he was up there, I think he came to value the Golden Order and what it represented, and the fact that even though the class system that he was born into, Morgott saw value in it and wanted to lift it up. I think that's also why he calls us graceless, he calls us foul, he calls us little. He sees us as beneath what he is, because he is trying to preserve the Golden Order, whereas we are trying to, in his mind, destroy what's left of it. He is a big noticeable character, and given that he is the first Elden Lord, anywhere he went he would have broad attention. Again, this is just speculation, but something that doesn't really hold a lot of weight. In his video on Morgott, Smoughtown theorizes that Morgott spent some time above ground and suggests that the time was spent with Godfrey. He also points out in the same video that when Morgott rose as king, he suggested an alliance to his other demigod kin occurred after the Shattering. Now, this does make sense, because why else would the thrones be present at the Elden Throne? Morgott calls upon their name, followed by calling them willful traitors all.
Graceless, tarnished. What is thy business with these thrones? Godric the Golden. The twin prodigies, Mikola and Melania. General Radahn. Praetor Rykard. Luna Princess Rani. Willful traitors.
I will have a link in the description of Smoughtown's video, which I highly recommend you watch. If you are one of my regular viewers here, you know that we are big fans of Smoughtown, and his takes on the Souls universe are always insightful. So, Morgott rose to kingship during the Shattering to help defend Leyndell, and as Smoughtown points out, Morgott had the right to do so given that he was of royal blood. He then tries to keep a sort of peace, but of course it falls apart. But why? Morgott tells you it's because of their flame of ambition. This makes me wonder, though, why? He said this over and over again, and at every moment we encounter him. Why does he keep saying this? It's simple. The other demigods had ambitions of their own. They all had their own plans to shape the world how they wanted to. And it is worth noting, there is a bit of respect with the way that Morgott says Radahn's name. Now, this could be because Radahn had gained Morgott's respect during their fight, but regardless, they all had their own agendas. And this probably deeply affected Morgott and his views on the other demigods. Think about it. Morgott spent his entire life in the underground, not aware of the politics going on in Leyndell. All he wanted to do was preserve with what was left of the Golden Order. But clearly the other demigods had their own intentions, and Morgott fell, pun intended there, he fell victim to his own naivety. He was loyal to the Golden Order, and perhaps hoped the others would be as well, at least enough to work together, but obviously this was not the case. And around this time, this is where we, the Tarnished Champions, enter the battlefield. And much like the other demigods, we have our own ambitions of becoming Elden Lord. We meet Morgott, or Morgott, a few times during our journey, and each time he is preventing us, or at least attempting to prevent us from achieving our ambitions. Morgott looks down on us and calls us foul or graceless. And when he talks to us, he ends his dialogue with Morgott the Fell, or Fell by King Morgott, last of all kings. But if you were to look at his health bar on both occasions, it says Morgott the Fell Omen, or Morgott the Omen King. A small detail, but an important one to be sure, something that we'll address in a moment. When we meet Morgott the Fell, he appears from a sort of golden aura, and when we defeat him, he leaves the same way. This same golden aura appears when we meet him in the Royal Capital battlefield, and once more at the Erdtree Sanctuary when we fight Godfrey, or the Golden Shade of Godfrey. This was all Morgott from standing on the Elden Throne. He was still attempting to defend the Elden Throne after all this time. To go back to the thought I had earlier on Morgott seemingly ignoring his Omen origins, it simply can't be ignored. Morgott abhors his Omen blood. We see this in the second phase transition of his fight. This moment is one of the biggest differences between Morgott and Mohg. Mohg has chosen to embrace his accursed blood and put it into service for the Formless Mother. Morgott has chosen to reject it. Listen to what he said earlier. The thrones, stained by my curse. Such shame I cannot bear. And I believe that this is the first time that this has ever happened to Morgott, this explosion of his accursed blood. I don't think he's ever been pushed to the point where he could not control his accursed blood. Additionally, Morgott slightly blames us. But, as the story goes, we defeat Morgott. And if you wait just before you go to the entrance of the Erdtree, you will find Morgott's corpse, and he still has more to say to us.
The Erdtree wards off all who deign approach. We are all forsaken. None may claim the title of Elden Lord. Thy deeds shall be met with failure, just as I.
Here we see a glimpse of ambition in Morgott, something that he looks down upon for everyone else. He attempted to become Elden Lord. And in all honesty, who can blame him? He defended the royal capital and pushed back the would-be usurpers. He does deserve to be Elden Lord, right? Well, that isn't for me to say. But one thing for sure, that he is right. No one can become Elden Lord. There were thorns preventing anyone from entering the Elden Throne. It is known that Radagon was the one to put up said thorns in the first place, though. We see the same lattice patterns on the thorns that we do see on his statues and his scar seal and his sword seal. Obviously, Morgott doesn't know this and just assumes that no one is supposed to take the mantle, despite his best efforts. Until we arrive. We are the ones who burn the thorns of the Erdtree, who basically contain destined death, And when we return, we see the first Elden Lord himself, Godfrey, holding his son.
It's been a long while, Morgott.
One of the things I admire about Morgott's story is that after all this, Morgott is grace given. His efforts are recognized by the Greater Will, and he's returned to the Erd Tree, unlike the other demigods. I think the fact that because Morgott had the life he was in the subterranean undergrounds, he was under Godfrey's tutelage, allegedly. I think with all that being said, and defending Leyndell to his last breath, we have to at least give some respect to him. He pushed against an order that, like I said earlier, didn't want him in the first place. He worked hard to preserve something his mother worked hard to build, and worked hard to basically push him away, push his people away, the Omen. And despite all this, he was able to not only get out of this situation, but he was also to essentially rise from the bottom to the top. And this is admirable because you have someone like Moog, who we'll do a video on at a later point, did the exact opposite of what his brother did. He said, I'm not going to go for this order. The Formless Mother has guided me and has been the reason why I'm here. This order, I want to start my new dynasty, a new order for myself and for those like me who were rejected by the Golden Order and its Erd Tree. Now, granted, I know that's not exactly what happened, but more or less, it is the sort of archetype story. Two brothers who, born in the same muck, the same area in life, and then both going into different paths. Now, obviously, I would have loved to have seen a story where the two of them somehow cross paths, or at least some sort of dialogue to sort of give some sort of indication on how each brother felt about the path that they were about to go on before they left and to never see each other again. But with all that being said, I do have to think that Morgott's Great Rune does the greatest job in summing up his character. And it says that the Omen King was born of the golden lineage, and that he was indeed a Lord of Leyndell. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please comment, like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the video. I would love to hear your thoughts on, any ideas that you have on any themes I should investigate as far as Elden Ring is concerned. Be on the lookout for a possible live stream within the coming weeks. I'm going to do a little bit of a Elden Ring challenge run, fist weapons only. But yeah, I'm excited for that. Like I said, be on the lookout for it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.